Worldviews have consequences. Some consequences are bigger than others. If your worldview informs you that some people are naturally superior to others, then you'll likely become a bully, or sexist, or racist. So, what are the consequences of a postmodern worldview?
Is there a difference between true truth and someone's own truth?
I think there is, but sometimes it doesn't matter.
Is all truth valid truth?
Yes.
Do you believe in absolute truth?
No.
Do you think that some things can be proven?
Yes.
Isn't that absolute truth?
The university system of our day has been infected with this kind of thinking where the idea is you get to choose your own truth, like it's some sort of choose your own adventure book where you get to pick your truth and nobody can tell you that their truth is better than your truth, substituting the word truth for the word belief. It is true that different people have different beliefs, but belief is different than truth. If I believe that I can fly like Superman and then I jump out of the back of an airplane without a parachute, my belief is quickly going to be exposed for the fallacy that it is, because I'm going to run smack dab into the reality of gravity. Reality doesn't change no matter what my belief system is. Unless your belief system actually corresponds with reality, then your faith is nothing more than a fantasy. Your faith is no better than thinking you can fly like Superman. Unless that faith is based or grounded in reality, it's not true.
Where do you think morality comes from?
Well, in America, it comes from Constitution, Judeo-Christian values, and yeah, I'd say those.
So, I know this is a crazy example,
Yeah.
but let's say there's a culture that thinks it's really cool when you're 5 years old to have a ceremony where you stick, burning hot poles into their eyes, okay? Is that right or wrong morally?
It's subjective. We kind of evolved from that because if you go back, like, I'd say 3,000 years ago, that was just that kind of sounds like a ritualistic approach to a boy becoming a man. Now it would be wrong, but back then,
It wouldn't have been bad.
No, not really.
The idea that culture determines morality is an interesting concept, and it certainly seems to be a popular idea within the postmodern Western culture that we find ourselves in. But it is inherently flawed, and I think if we even think back through history at some examples, people would immediately say, well, okay, maybe culture should be the determiner of morality, but that culture was immoral. Times where you have brutal dictators who slaughter their own people, mass genocide, you have war, brutality, all sorts of bloodshed throughout human history where a culture decided that was okay, and yet we would say, no, that's not okay.
So Nazi Germany, for example, do you think that they were wrong to kill 6 million Jews?
Yes.
Why?
I guess because I was bred to think that it's wrong to single out a minority and kill them off. But maybe in other cultures that would be looked at as normal.
That really is so indicative of the age in which we live and sort of the postmodern relativistic mindset. It leads you to say absurd things like that. And the reason we are repulsed by the thought of that is because we inherently know that that's wrong. And the reason we inherently know that that's wrong is because of the work of the law of God written on the hearts of men, their conscience bearing witness to that, Romans 2:15, this principle in which God has placed in everyone's heart a basic moral compass. And that basic moral compass always points north in the sense that it always points back to the character, the fundamental character of who God is. So we inherently know something's wrong. We don't need culture to tell us that it's wrong. The reason cultures, generally speaking, have a similar moral framework is because they all are made up of people who have that same moral compass. I think anytime you remove God from the picture, you find that life is ultimately empty. And we go back to Solomon and his emphasis on vanity. Everything is fleeting and ultimately empty apart from God. When it comes to trying to find the answers for why things are the way they are, science and reason can take us so far, but if you omit God from the picture, you're never going to answer some of those ultimate questions. And then when it comes to pursuing the chief end of your life, the pursuit of your own happiness, it may satisfy for a short time, but in the end, it will not satisfy you. And so you won't get answers that are ultimately satisfying in either area And I think we're seeing that in the philosophical system of a more optimistic system, runs its course, and at the end of it, oh, it didn't do what we thought it would. Now it's a more pessimistic system. That pessimism ultimately is going to lead to things like nihilism and despair, because that is where any worldview that doesn't have God as part of it ultimately leads.
So what's nihilism?
Nihilism is essentially an emphasis on nothingness. It is the ultimate end of despair. It is where atheism and agnosticism ultimately lead, because life apart from God is meaningless, it is empty, it is, in its end, hopeless.
Seems like a lot of people are in that place right now. Their postmodernism has led them to that hopelessness.
Have you struggled with suicidal thoughts ever?
A couple years ago.
Would you be willing to describe what happened?
I mean, nothing really happened. It was just thoughts that occurred, and then like decisions on whether or not it was something I wanted to do.
What made you feel that way initially? What made you feel depressed at the first place?
I don't know, just like not really seeing why you're doing anything.
Many in society do feel hopeless, which is why you see suicide rates, even among young people, going up. Because the emptiness of a system apart from God leads to this kind of despair, and the answer to that despair is the God that they're omitting from their worldview. One of the most famous nihilists was a guy named Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's famous for the phrase, God is dead. He put that in the mouths of one of his characters in an essay that he wrote, a raving madman who was going around saying, God is dead and we have killed him. And what he meant by that was he meant that Western society in the Enlightenment had omitted God from its worldview. This raving madman is talking about how now that we have, quote unquote, killed God, he said, now what? We're just floating around in space. We have no purpose for existence. We have no answers to our ultimate questions. And Nietzsche, as a philosopher, got a lot of things really, really wrong. But I think he understood that when you take God out of your worldview, well, now you're nothing more than a random organism floating around on this rock in space, aimlessly.
When we break down the path of postmodernism, it isn't all rainbows and butterflies. Following this worldview to its full conclusion leads us to ultimately living meaningless lives. Postmodernism's endgame is hopelessness, a world that's pointless. And if it does lead to a dead end, what are we going to do about that? Where do we find real truth? Can real truth be reconciled to a postmodern worldview?